He walked out of the hospital room while his wife was screaming in labor. Not to call the doctor. Not to get blood. Not to pray. He walked out to answer her. Chioma and Kira lay on the delivery bed, legs shaking, sweat and tears mixing as pain tore through her body like fire. The white sheets beneath her were no longer white. Blood spread slowly, unmistakably, the kind that makes nurses stop smiling and doctors start moving fast. The heart monitor beside her began to scream. "Madam." "You're bleeding," the nurse said, her voice no longer calm, no longer gentle. Chioma turned her head toward the glass door, hoping, praying, to see her husband rush back in. Instead, she saw Kunle in the corridor, phone pressed to his ear, pacing, smiling faintly, nodding like a man closing a business deal. And beside him stood another woman. Tight red dress, arms folded, heel tapping impatiently against the hospital floor, annoyed, not afraid. Waiting for him to finish with this, so they could move on with the real night. That was the moment Chioma understood something colder than pain. Some men don't abandon you by accident. They abandon you because they've already decided your life is optional. Another contraction slammed into her. She screamed again. Raw, desperate, animal, and still, Kunle didn't come back. Her vision blurred as a thought sliced through her fear. If I die tonight, he will cry at my funeral. He will say, childbirth complications. And everyone will believe him. Her shaking fingers reached for her phone. She needed a witness. She needed someone who would choose her life over his reputation. What Kunle didn't know, what his mistress didn't know, was that karma was already inside that hospital. Not loud, not dramatic, but patient, watching, recording. And by morning, everything Kunle thought he controlled would be gone. Before we continue, pause for a second and tell me in the comments, be honest. If the man who vowed to protect you left you bleeding to be with another woman, would you ever forgive him? Like this video if you believe no woman deserves this. Subscribe if you believe truth always finds a witness. And stay with me, because this night doesn't end in silence. It ends in consequences. Chioma and Kira did not learn silence all at once. It was taught to her gently, patiently, over time, the way bad habits are formed without anyone noticing the exact moment they became permanent. At first, it was small things. A question asked too carefully. A concern raised too softly. Kunle would tilt his head, smile in that calm, reasonable way that made other people admire him, and say, "You worry too much." Not angrily. Never angrily. Just enough to make her feel embarrassed for even thinking the thought. Chioma would laugh it off, apologize, and tell herself she was lucky to have a man so composed, so mature, so above unnecessary conflict. Kunle didn't hit her. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. Those were the kinds of men people warned you about. Kunle was different. Kunle explained. Kunle corrected. Kunle reframed reality until Chioma wasn't sure which parts of her feelings were valid and which parts were flaws she needed to work on. When she said she felt lonely, he called it independence. When she said she felt unheard, he called it impatience. When she sensed distance, he called it ambition. And every time, he ended the conversation the same way, by reminding her how much he did, how hard he worked, how stressful his life was, and how grateful she should be that he still made time for her at all. Slowly, Chioma learned the cost of peace. Peace meant not asking why he came home late smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers. Peace meant not mentioning the phone calls he took outside at night, voice lowered, laughter restrained. Peace meant swallowing the tight feeling in her chest when Kunle posted pictures of their marriage online that looked happier than the life she lived inside it. "People admire us," he'd say, scrolling through comments. "Don't ruin that with negativity." And Chioma, wanting to be a good wife, learned to protect the image even when the truth scratched at her from the inside. Publicly, Kunle was everything people praised. Successful. Polished. Generous. The kind of man elders pointed at during family gatherings and said, "This is how a husband should be." He donated to church. He paid school fees for distant relatives. He spoke well. He dressed well. He knew when to smile and when to be silent in rooms that mattered. Standing beside him, Chioma looked like a woman who had won life's lottery.
People told her she was blessed.
People told her she was lucky. People told her to pray for others to have what she had. What they didn't see was how affection in their home came with conditions. Kunle didn't withhold love completely. He rationed it. He gave warmth when Chioma behaved correctly, when she didn't ask questions, when she didn't press too hard. He withdrew it when she challenged him, even gently. Days would pass without meaningful conversation, without touch, without eye contact that lingered. Chioma would find herself trying harder. Cooking better meals, dressing more carefully, laughing at jokes that didn't land, without ever admitting to herself that she was performing for crumbs. When the miscarriages started, the silence deepened. Each loss carved something out of Chioma, and Kunle responded with a kind of efficiency that looked like strength to outsiders. He paid hospital bills quickly. He arranged doctors. He told people, "We're fine." And then he moved on. He never sat in the grief with her. He never let it slow him down. When Chioma cried at night, Kunle would place a hand on her shoulder, already half asleep, and murmur, "Don't stress yourself. It will happen when it happens." His tone suggested the subject was closed. By the third miscarriage, Chioma stopped talking about her pain altogether. She stopped naming her fear. She stopped asking if Kunle was as devastated as she was. Silence became easier than disappointment. She learned to carry loss quietly, the way women before her had carried it, wrapped in smiles, buried under prayer, hidden behind strength people applauded but never questioned. So when the pregnancy finally stayed, when weeks turned into months, and the doctors started sounding hopeful instead of cautious, Chioma believed, deeply, that this child would fix what had been breaking slowly for years. She told herself the baby would soften Kunle, anchor him, bring him back into the emotional space he'd been drifting away from. She imagined hospital visits where he held her hand, nights where they talked about names and futures, a family that would finally feel real instead of staged. Kunle played his part well at first. He attended scans. He smiled for photos. He posted captions about fatherhood and blessings and gratitude. He let Chioma rest her head on his shoulder in public. He made promises, subtle ones, wrapped in reassurance, that things would be different now. Chioma clung to those promises, like lifelines. She ignored the way his phone never left his hand. She ignored the way some calls ended too abruptly when she entered the room. She ignored the fact that intimacy between them still felt scheduled, transactional, careful. Deep down, Chioma sensed the truth pressing against her ribs. But sensing truth and confronting it are not the same thing. Confrontation had consequences. Silence felt safer. Silence had kept the marriage intact. Silence had taught her how to survive. By the time she was heavily pregnant, Chioma had become an expert at editing herself. She rehearsed sentences in her head and discarded them before they reached her mouth. She asked permission to feel tired. She apologized for needing reassurance. She thanked Kunle for things that should have been automatic, showing up, listening, staying. And Kunle accepted her gratitude without question, as if her needs were favors he granted instead of responsibilities he owed. It never occurred to Chioma that some men don't change when children come. They don't soften. They don't grow. They adapt. They learn how to hide better. They learn how to maintain appearances while quietly prioritizing themselves. Kunle had mastered that long before the pregnancy. Chioma just hadn't wanted to see it. On the outside, their life looked stable. On the inside, it was built on avoidance, performance, and a silence that asked Chioma to keep shrinking so the marriage could keep standing. She told herself love required endurance. She told herself patience was strength. She told herself that every marriage had seasons, and this was just a difficult one. What she didn't know, what she could not yet see, was that the silence she had perfected would one day nearly cost her life. And that the man she had protected from discomfort would not protect her when she needed him most. The lesson her marriage taught her was simple, brutal, and slow. When you swallow your voice long enough, the world starts believing you don't have one. Kunle Ao believed in presentation long before he believed in people. To him, life was a series of carefully framed images, and success meant controlling what others were allowed to see. He understood optics instinctively, the way some men understand weather. He knew when to speak and when to smile, when to donate and when to disappear, when to post and when to remain strategically silent. Truth was flexible. Perception was power. And Kunle had built his entire identity on making sure the right story was always being told about him. He approached marriage the same way he approached business. You highlight the wins. You bury the costs. You talk about growth, not damage. From the outside, his marriage to Chioma looked like a brand partnership that worked. She was calm, soft-spoken, educated, and elegant in a way that made him look grounded and respectable. She fit perfectly into the image of a man rising fast, a man elders trusted, a man younger men admired. Kunle liked how Chioma made him look. He liked how people nodded approvingly when she stood beside him. He liked how her silence translated into stability. Love, to him, was not an emotion to be nurtured. It was an asset to be managed. Being a husband was something Kunle performed, not something he carried inside him. He knew the lines. He knew the gestures. He knew when to hold Chioma's hand in public and when to let go the moment they were alone. He knew when to post anniversary photos and when to send flowers that arrived just in time to be seen by the right people. Responsibility bore him. Visibility energized him. As long as the image held, Kunle believed the marriage was fine. He loved Chioma the way one loves a good resume.
It proved something.
It opened doors. It made him look reliable. But like a resume, it could be edited, updated, replaced. He never thought of loyalty as something owed to a person. Loyalty in Kunle's world flowed upward, toward influence, opportunity, advantage. You stayed loyal to what elevated you. You stayed loyal to power. Everything else was negotiable. That was why Chioma's pain never registered as urgent. Her miscarriages were unfortunate, but they were also inconvenient. They slowed conversations he wanted to move past. They pulled focus from his momentum. Kunle believed in efficiency, and grief had no clear return on investment. He showed up just enough to look supportive, then returned to the things that matter more: meetings, calls, deals, rooms where his name carried weight. When Chioma needed emotional presence, Kunle offered solutions. When she needed reassurance, he offered logic. When she needed care, he offered distance wrapped in calm explanations. And then Vanessa Funmi appeared, and the world rearranged itself in a way that felt almost reasonable to him. Vanessa didn't enter Kunle's life quietly. She arrived the way confidence does, bold, unapologetic, radiant in her certainty. She dressed like she belonged in rooms that demanded attention. She spoke without shrinking her voice. She laughed loudly. She touched his arm without asking permission. She never apologized for wanting more. To Kunle, she didn't feel like temptation. Temptation implied risk. Temptation implied guilt. Vanessa felt like inevitability. She met him where he was, in the spaces Chioma never occupied. Business dinners, private lounges, late-night conversations that blurred into early mornings. Vanessa understood ambition. She admired it openly. She never asked Kunle to slow down or reflect. She encouraged him to move faster, aim higher, want more. Where Chioma represented stability, Vanessa represented acceleration. And Kunle had always been drawn to motion. With Vanessa, Kunle didn't have to explain himself. He didn't have to minimize. He didn't have to manage emotions carefully. She didn't require editing. She required indulgence. He could be expansive with her in ways he'd stopped being with Chioma long ago. Vanessa made him feel chosen without demanding accountability. She made him feel powerful without asking him to be present. And in Kunle's mind, that wasn't betrayal. It was efficiency. He compartmentalized easily. Chioma belonged to one version of his life. Vanessa belonged to another. There was no overlap in his thinking because overlap created discomfort, and Kunle avoided discomfort like a flaw. He convinced himself that what Chioma didn't know couldn't hurt her, that as long as he maintained the image of a devoted husband, the structure held. He told himself that everyone did this at his level. That fidelity was a luxury for men without ambition. That real men made practical choices. When Vanessa began to ask questions about the future, Kunle didn't panic. He planned. Planning was his strength. He reassured her in pieces. Not now. Soon. After things settle. He spoke in timelines that always favored him. He made promises that were vague enough to be denied later if necessary. And when Vanessa pressed harder, he framed it as patience, as strategy, as sacrifice for a bigger picture she would soon benefit from. He never once considered what these calculations meant for Chioma. Her pregnancy did not register as a turning point in his mind. It was a logistical adjustment, not a moral one. He told himself he would manage both worlds the way he managed everything else, quietly, cleanly, without scandal. The baby would arrive. The marriage would continue. Vanessa would wait. And when the time was right, he would pivot. That was how he saw it. A pivot, not a betrayal. Kunle's greatest flaw was not cruelty. It was detachment disguised as intelligence. He believed he was smarter than consequences, that foresight meant control. He underestimated the weight of moments that cannot be negotiated away. He underestimated pain that refuses to stay quiet. He underestimated the way truth accumulates, unnoticed, until it collapses the structures built to hide it. When Chioma went into labor, Kunle saw it as disruption, not reckoning. He was irritated by the timing. He was distracted by unfinished conversations. He treated the hospital like a holding space, something to get through before returning to what he considered real life. Even as Chioma's body began to fail, Kunle's focus remained outward, on calls, on messages, on Vanessa's impatience, waiting in the corridor. That was the difference between the man he was and the man Chioma believed she was married to. To Kunle, love was a function. Marriage was a title. Loyalty was strategic. And people, especially women who waited, endured, and forgave, were resources he assumed would remain available no matter how poorly he treated them. He did not see abandonment as violence. He saw it as prioritization. He did not see betrayal as harm. He saw it as optimization. He believed he could step away from Chioma's suffering the same way he stepped away from bad investments, with calm justification and the confidence that nothing truly important would be lost. What Kunle did not understand was that some moments do not allow branding. Some moments do not care about optics. Some moments strip a man down to what he chooses when no one is applauding. And the night Chioma went into labor was one of those moments. By the time Kunle finally realized that love cannot be managed like a portfolio, it was already too late to rewrite the narrative. The image he had protected so carefully was about to fracture under the weight of a truth he never thought would matter. And for the first time in his life, Kunle was about to learn that efficiency has a cost, and sometimes that cost is everything. Vanessa Funmi had never thought of herself as the villain in anyone's story. Villains, in her mind, were desperate women who clawed and begged and schemed from the shadows. Vanessa did none of that.
She didn't sneak.
She didn't hide who she was. She walked into rooms knowing exactly what she wanted and believing she deserved it. If anything, she saw herself as practical, strategic, honest about ambition in a world that punished women for admitting they wanted more. She wasn't stealing a husband. That was how other women framed it. Women who clung to vows like life rafts while their lives slowly sank. Vanessa believed she was upgrading her future. Kunle had chosen her. That mattered more than paperwork, ceremonies, or a ring worn by a woman who no longer fit the life Kunle was building. In Vanessa's mind, marriage was a formality that lagged behind reality. Reality was chemistry. Reality was attention. Reality was who a man turned to when he wanted to feel alive. Kunle had made it sound inevitable from the beginning. He spoke in calm certainties, never rushed, never frantic. Just wait, he'd said more than once, always with that reassuring half-smile. Everything has a process. After the baby, Everything will change. He talked about timing the way men who like control always do, as if life were a chessboard and emotions were pieces that could be moved without consequence. Vanessa listened, nodded, and believed him, not because she was naive, but because his version of the future suited her perfectly. She had waited before. She knew how to wait. She waited through late nights and canceled plans. She waited through holidays spent alone while Kunle claimed family obligations. She waited through moments when he'd pull away slightly, reminding her that discretion mattered. And every time doubt tried to creep in, Kunle would pull her back with promises that felt solid. He never said if. He always said when. When the dust settled. When things were calmer. When the baby arrived. So waiting in that hospital corridor didn't feel ominous to Vanessa. It felt temporary. She stood there in her red dress, arms crossed, heel tapping lightly against the polished floor, irritation growing with every passing minute. Hospitals were not where she imagined this night going. She had envisioned dinner.
Wine.
Kunle finally free from obligations, finally choosing her without interruption. Instead, she was stuck outside a maternity ward listening to muffled sounds she didn't care to understand. Chioma's pain was noise to Vanessa, an inconvenience. Something unfortunate but necessary to endure on the way to a better outcome. Vanessa didn't hate Chioma. Hate required emotional investment. She barely thought about her at all. In Vanessa's story, Chioma was already fading, a placeholder wife whose relevance was ending. The pregnancy wasn't sacred to Vanessa. It was a countdown. That was why she felt annoyance instead of fear when Kunle didn't return immediately. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Kunle had promised efficiency.
Control.
Smooth transitions. She glanced at her phone, reread messages that reassured her, reminded herself that men like Kunle didn't abandon plans. They executed them. If he was delayed, it was because he was handling something. And once it was handled, he would come back to her. She didn't notice the irony of that belief. She didn't question what it meant that Kunle could step away so easily from a woman in labor. She didn't ask herself what kind of man leaves a bleeding wife to take a call. Vanessa wasn't interested in character assessments. She was interested in outcomes. In her mind, timing was everything. She had entered Kunle's life at the right moment. When he was restless, distracted, ready for something new, she had offered him admiration without demands, excitement without accountability. She told herself that relationships didn't end because of affairs. They ended because they were already broken. If Chioma was being left behind, it was because she couldn't keep up. That was the story Vanessa told herself to sleep at night. Standing there in that corridor, Vanessa felt certain she was close to winning. The discomfort of waiting only reinforced her belief that she had endured enough. She deserved the reward. She checked her reflection in the glass, adjusted her posture, smoothed her dress. She imagined walking out of that hospital later beside Kunle, no longer hidden, no longer patient. She imagined the looks from people who would finally understand that she hadn't been foolish, she had been right. What Vanessa didn't understand was that timing only feels powerful when you're not the one being used as practice. Kunle had rehearsed his detachment with Chioma long before Vanessa ever arrived. He had perfected the art of stepping away emotionally, of explaining absence as necessity, of prioritizing himself without appearing cruel. Vanessa benefited from those rehearsals. She enjoyed the version of Kunle that had already learned how to lie smoothly, how to compartmentalize guilt, how to promise futures without paying present costs. She mistook that polish for commitment. Vanessa believed she was different. She believed Kunle's attentiveness to her meant she mattered more. She believed his secrecy proved protection, not cowardice. She believed the way he chose her in private meant he would eventually choose her in public. She did not consider that a man who betrays one woman efficiently is simply refining the skill he will later use again. When Kunle paced the corridor with his phone pressed to his ear, Vanessa watched in the way one watches a man who belongs to you, confident, expectant, impatient for him to finish his task and return. She didn't hear the screams from behind the door as human suffering. She heard them as delay. Every cry was another minute stolen from her night. Another reminder that Chioma, inconvenient even now, was in the way. Vanessa's irritation grew sharper when Kunle lingered longer than expected. She asked questions with her eyes. She sighed. She sent messages he didn't immediately answer. This was not the controlled situation she'd been promised. She felt the first flicker of unease then, though she wouldn't have named it fear. Fear would have required her to imagine that Kunle might not be fully in control. She told herself that everything was fine, that things were simply messy, because life sometimes was. She clung to Kunle's words like guarantees. After the baby. She repeated it silently, like a mantra. After the baby, there would be clarity. After the baby, there would be honesty. After the baby, there would be her. She didn't know that some promises are designed only to buy time. That some men speak about the future the way they speak about weather. Confident, casual, detached from responsibility. She didn't know that being chosen during betrayal does not mean being chosen forever. It means being convenient now. As the night stretched on and the atmosphere shifted around her, Vanessa remained focused on herself. She did not look at the nurses' faces as they changed from routine to alarm. She did not notice the way voices sharpened, the way urgency crept into the air. She did not consider the possibility that something irreversible was happening on the other side of that door. That kind of awareness would have required empathy, and empathy would have complicated her certainty. What Vanessa believed was simple. She had waited long enough. Timing owed her. She deserved the life Kunle had described. And whatever Chioma was going through was unfortunate, but temporary. She did not yet understand the oldest lesson in betrayal. That when someone cheats with you, they're showing you exactly how disposable loyalty is in their hands. That the same patience you're praised for today will be demanded of you tomorrow. That inevitability is often just a story men tell to keep women quiet. By the time Vanessa realized that timing does not belong to those who think they control it, the night had already turned against her. And the future she believed was waiting patiently on the other side of inconvenience was about to disappear completely. Pain arrived without ceremony, sudden and unforgiving, like a storm that didn't bother to announce itself. One moment Chioma was trying to breathe through a tightening in her belly, telling herself it was manageable, that women had done this for centuries. The next, her body seized with a force so sharp it stole the air from her lungs. She gripped the edge of the bed, nails digging into the sheets as the contraction rolled through her like something alive, something determined to break her open from the inside. The nurses had been calm before, smiling, reassuring, talking about timing and progress and patience. But as Chioma's breaths turned ragged and her face twisted with pain she could no longer hide, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Movements became quicker. Voices dropped lower. One nurse glanced at the monitor, then at Chioma's legs, then back at the screen again. The beeping that had been steady and almost comforting started to stutter, losing its rhythm like a heart that couldn't decide what it wanted to do. Chioma reached instinctively for Kunle. Not because she needed him to fix anything. Not because she expected answers. She just needed him there. His presence. His hand. Proof that she wasn't doing this alone. Her eyes scanned the room, panic rising in her chest when she didn't immediately see him beside her. Then she noticed him near the door, half turned away, phone vibrating in his hand as if it were impatient to be answered. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last. Chioma cried out, the sound tearing out of her before she could soften it. Sweat broke across her forehead. Her legs trembled. She felt something warm spreading beneath her and tried to tell herself it was normal, that this was part of the process. But the nurse's expression changed too quickly for comfort. "Madam," the nurse said quietly, leaning closer, her voice losing its gentle edge. "You're bleeding." The word landed heavier than the pain. Bleeding. Chioma's mind snagged on it, fear rushing in so fast it made her dizzy. This wasn't what she had prepared for. This wasn't just labor anymore. This wasn't just pain that ended with a baby and relief. This was something else. Something dangerous. The room shifted fully then, from anticipation to alarm. Another nurse stepped in, her movements brisk, professional. Gloves snapped on. The doctor was called. The monitor beeped faster, erratically now, a sound that felt like it was crawling under Chioma's skin. Voices overlapped. Instructions were given. Chioma's body shook as another wave of pain tore through her, and she screamed, no longer caring how she sounded. Through the haze of fear and agony, she looked again for Kunle. He hadn't moved closer. He hadn't put the phone away. He stood there, eyes flicking between the screen and the room, distracted, as if he were being pulled in two directions and resented being forced to choose. The buzzing of his phone sounded obscene in the middle of the chaos, like a reminder that somewhere else, something else, was demanding his attention. Chioma tried to speak his name, but her throat felt thick, her voice trapped behind pain and panic. She wanted to tell him she was scared, that something felt wrong, that she needed him. Instead, another contraction ripped through her, and the words dissolved into a cry that echoed off the sterile walls. Kunle glanced up briefly, irritation flashing across his face, then looked back down at the phone. In that moment, something inside Chioma shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, devastating clarity. She saw the distance not just in space, but in choice. He was already gone, standing there in body, but absent in every way that mattered. The nurse pressed gently but firmly against Chioma's leg, trying to slow the bleeding, murmuring instructions she barely heard. Chioma's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Her vision blurred at the edges, fear tightening around her chest until breathing felt like work. "This is not normal," someone said. Another voice responded with urgency. The doctor arrived, eyes sharp, assessing the situation in seconds. Words like monitor, heart rate, and possible complications floated through the air, terrifying in their vagueness. Chioma clutched the bed rail, knuckles white, and thought of all the times she had told herself to be patient. All the times she had stayed quiet to keep peace. All the times she had minimized her own needs so Kunle wouldn't feel burdened. None of that mattered now. None of it could protect her here. She turned her head toward the door again, desperation burning through her fear, and caught Kunle stepping slightly into the corridor, phone pressed to his ear. His voice dropped, softened, taking on a tone she hadn't heard directed at her in a long time. He nodded as he listened, pacing just beyond the threshold of the room. Chioma watched him through the blur of tears and pain, watched him smile faintly at something said on the other end of the line, and the truth settled into her bones with a cold finality. He wasn't torn. He wasn't confused. He had chosen. Another sharp pain surged, stronger than anything before it, and Chioma cried out again, her body arching involuntarily. The nurse moved faster now, calling Kunle's attention more sharply, but he lifted a finger without looking, a silent command to wait. The gesture cut deeper than any insult ever had. "You need to stay with us," the doctor said to Chioma, his voice firm, grounding. "Focus on me." She tried. She really did. But her eyes kept drifting to the doorway, to the man she had built her life around, who now stood just outside the room, back half-turned, as if proximity alone fulfilled his obligation. When the nurse whispered again, closer this time, "You're bleeding more," Chioma felt terror unlike anything she had known. It wasn't just fear of pain anymore. It was fear of disappearing. Fear of becoming a story told after the fact. Fear of dying quietly while someone else controlled the narrative. A thought pierced her panic, sharp and unwelcome. If she didn't make it, Kunle would explain it away. He would stand somewhere, solemn and composed, and say the right words. Complications. Tragedy. God's will. And people would nod, sympathetic, never knowing how alone she had been in this moment. Chioma's fingers fumbled weakly toward her phone on the bedside table, the screen blurring as tears spilled freely now. She needed someone else. Anyone else. A witness. Someone who would see her, hear her, choose her. As another contraction tore through her and the room buzzed with controlled chaos, Chioma understood something with brutal clarity. This was no longer about bringing a child into the world. This was about staying alive. And the man she had silenced herself for, protected, defended, and loved was not going to save her. The certainty settled heavy and unyielding in her chest. Whatever happened next, she would face it without him. Kunle didn't announce that he was leaving the room. He didn't say, "I'll be right back," or offer even the thinnest reassurance. He simply stepped away, phone already in his hand, body angling toward the corridor as if it had been calling him long before the device ever rang. It was a small movement, almost unnoticeable, but something in it felt final, like a door closing quietly instead of slamming. Chioma saw it happen through a haze of pain and fear. She watched him cross the threshold, watched his back turn to her bed, watched the glass door slide partly shut between them. In that instant, something inside her fractured, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Whatever hope she had been holding on to, whatever belief that he would choose her when it mattered most, slipped away without resistance. The corridor swallowed Kunle easily. The noise of the room softened around him, replaced by the clean, controlled quiet outside. He pressed the phone to his ear and exhaled, shoulders loosening as if he had stepped out of a storm into calm. His voice changed immediately, lower, warmer, almost gentle. It was a voice Chioma recognized, one he used when he wanted to soothe, to reassure, to be chosen. Inside the room, the storm worsened. Another contraction ripped through Chioma's body, sharper than the last, dragging a scream out of her throat before she could stop it. Her back arched, fingers clawing at the sheets as if they might anchor her to the bed. The monitor's beeping spiked, irregular and frantic. Nurses moved in closer, voices urgent now, hands firm as they worked to slow the bleeding. "Sir," one of them called toward the door, sharper this time. "Your wife needs—" Kunle lifted a finger without turning around. Just one finger. A silent command.
Wait.
The gesture landed harder than any slap ever could have. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was dismissal. He had heard them. He had chosen not to respond. Through the glass, Chioma could see him pacing slowly, nodding into the phone, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. A smile. In the middle of her hemorrhaging. In the middle of the chaos that threatened her life and their child's. That smile was the moment the marriage died. Not later. Not in court. Not in some quiet conversation that would never come. Right there, in the fluorescent light of a hospital corridor, while blood soaked into white sheets and fear filled the room, Kunle Ao chose another voice over hers. And in doing so, he ended everything they had ever been. Chioma screamed again. The sound echoed against the walls, raw and desperate, stripped of dignity or control. It was the sound of a woman being pulled apart from the inside, body and spirit both straining to survive. It was the sound of someone begging without words. Kunle did not come back. He leaned against the corridor wall now, posture relaxed, phone pressed to his ear like it belonged there. He laughed softly at something said on the other end. Not a full laugh, just a breath of amusement, intimate and private. The kind of sound meant only for someone you care about. Chioma saw it all. She felt the truth settle into her bones, heavier than the pain, heavier than the fear. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't bad timing. This was a choice.
Clear.
Deliberate. Calculated. The nurses worked faster, urgency sharpening every movement. Someone mentioned calling the doctor again. Someone else said her blood pressure was dropping. Words like complications and emergency drifted through the air, terrifying in their calm professionalism. Chioma's vision blurred, tears streaming freely now, mixing with sweat and blood and terror. She tried to speak Kunle's name one last time. Not to beg him to love her, not to ask for explanations, but simply to anchor herself to the reality that she was not alone. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Another contraction slammed into her, and she cried out instead, the sound breaking and uneven, like something tearing loose inside her chest. Still, Kunle didn't turn around. That was when Chioma understood the most dangerous thing about abandonment. It doesn't always look like walking away forever. Sometimes it looks like staying close enough to see, but far enough not to care. Kunle hadn't packed a bag. He hadn't said goodbye. He hadn't even fully left the space. He was right there, separated by glass and choice, proving that proximity means nothing when loyalty is gone. As the pain surged and the room filled with controlled panic, Chioma felt something else rise beneath the fear. A quiet, devastating clarity. This man would not save her. This man would not protect her. This man would not even witness her honestly. If she lived, it would not be because of him. And if she died, he would explain it away with calm words and a steady face. He would call it tragedy. He would call it fate. He would never call it abandonment. Her fingers trembled as they reached weakly toward the bedside table, toward her phone. She needed someone else. Someone who would not look away. Someone who would not choose comfort over her life. Behind the glass, Kunle smiled again, nodding as if agreeing to something that mattered more than the woman bleeding a few feet away. Inside the room, Chioma's scream echoed unanswered. That echo was the sound of a marriage ending, and the sound of consequences beginning. Before we go any further, pause for a moment. If you were Chioma, if the person who vowed to protect you walked out while you were fighting for your life, would you ever forgive that? Tell me in the comments. If you believe no woman deserves this kind of abandonment, like this video so more people hear this story. If you believe silence should never be rewarded, subscribe and stay with me. Because what happens next is not about love anymore. It's about truth. It's about witnesses. And it's about karma that doesn't wait for morning. Silence almost won that night. It hovered in the corners of the labor room like a second air. Thick, familiar, trained into Chioma over years of swallowing questions and apologizing for instincts. Silence told her not to embarrass her husband. Silence told her not to make a scene. Silence told her to endure quietly, to be the kind of woman people praised, patient, calm, strong. But pain has a way of dragging truth to the surface, and blood has a way of making pretenses useless. The first witnesses were the nurses, and they didn't look like heroes. They looked like tired women in scrubs with hair tucked under caps and hands moving fast. But there is a kind of courage that doesn't shout. It simply refuses to participate in a lie. Nurse Esther's eyes sharpened the moment she saw the blood spread too quickly. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't use soft language to protect anyone's ego. "Madam, you're hemorrhaging," she said, and the room changed instantly. Nurse Priscilla moved to the monitors, fingers flying across buttons, calling out numbers like they were prayers. Their voices became clipped, direct. Their bodies turned into urgency. They weren't just assisting labor anymore. They were fighting for a life. And when they looked toward the door and saw a husband absent in the most unforgivable way, their faces hardened with something older than professionalism. "Where is the husband?" Dr. Collins Obinna asked when he stepped in, already reading the room with the calm of a man who had seen too many women bleed, while men looked away. "He stepped out," Esther replied, and the way she said it was not neutral. It was accusation wrapped in restraint. A junior staff member hurried to the door to call Kunle back, but Kunle's raised finger in the corridor silenced her like she was nothing. The girl hesitated, caught between hierarchy and humanity. Then a voice cut through the hesitation like a blade. "Move." Senior midwife Rebecca entered the room with the posture of a woman who had delivered babies in storms and watched men claim glory afterward. She was older, her face lined with experience, and her eyes held no patience for nonsense. Rebecca took one look at Chioma's bleeding, one look at the monitor's erratic rhythm, and her jaw set like a lock. She didn't ask permission. She marched straight into the corridor. Chioma could see her through the glass panel, could see her confront Kunle where he stood with his phone pressed to his ear like it mattered more than the heartbeat crashing on the screen inside. Rebecca didn't plead. She didn't soften her tone because he wore a good watch and spoke like a man used to obedience. "Sir," she said, loud enough to pull attention from the hallway, "your wife is hemorrhaging. If you want your child alive, you will come now." Kunle's face tightened with irritation, the familiar look he wore whenever life dared to inconvenience him. He started to respond, some polished line, some excuse, some attempt to reclaim control, but Rebecca held his gaze like a judge. "And you will sign consent," she added, "because we are not watching a woman die while you negotiate your ego." That was when the corridor camera above them quietly did its own work. It didn't blink. It didn't flinch. It simply recorded. The angle of Kunle's body turned away from the labor room, the way he leaned closer to the person on the call, the slight smile that betrayed comfort in the middle of crisis, the raised finger that silenced a nurse, the way he treated the emergency like noise. Inside the room, Chioma's world narrowed to pain and air and survival. Her fingers, slick with sweat, found her phone again. Her vision blurred. Her throat burned. But she remembered Mama Beatrice's warning from days before, that strange seriousness that had embarrassed Chioma at the time. Don't be brave alone.
Call someone.
Don't protect his name more than your life. With shaking hands, Chioma pressed her cousin Lydia Chinyer's name, the one person whose voice never trembled when truth was needed. The call rang once.
Twice.
On the third ring, Lydia answered. "Chioma? What's wrong?" Chioma couldn't form full words. Her breath came in broken pieces. But Lydia didn't need a complete sentence. She heard the terror. She heard the background noise, beeping, urgency, voices snapping commands. "Where are you?" Lydia demanded. Chioma whispered the hospital name, barely audible. Another contraction slammed into her, and the phone slipped in her palm. The line went dead. Outside that hospital room, Kunle's confidence was still intact because he thought witnesses could be managed. He thought staff could be intimidated. He thought his wife's pain would remain private, contained behind a door like so many things he'd buried before. He forgot that some women are not built to watch quietly. The door flew open with force that startled even the nurses. Lydia Chinyer burst in like a storm wearing human skin, wrapper tied tight, eyes blazing, phone already raised. She didn't pause to take in the room politely. She moved like someone who had come to rescue a life, not preserve a marriage. "What is happening here?" Lydia's voice cut through the chaos. "Why is she bleeding and her husband is outside pressing phone like baby?" Kunle stepped in behind her, startled now, irritation shifting into alarm as he saw the phone pointed in his direction. A camera meant accountability. A witness meant consequences. "This is a hospital," he snapped, trying to reclaim authority. "You can't just—" "I can," Lydia snapped back, lifting the phone higher. "And I will." Then Mama Beatrice arrived behind Lydia, and the room changed again. Chioma's mother-in-law looked smaller than the moment required, but something in her moved like steel. Her headscarf was crooked as if she'd thrown it on without care. Her eyes were wet, but her face was set with the fierce focus of a woman who suddenly understood that silence had been the price of too many things. She rushed to Chioma's side and grabbed her hand. "My daughter," Mama Beatrice whispered, and the words sounded like repentance. "Hold on, hold on." Her prayers began trembling out of her lips, not soft, not performative, desperate, shaking prayers that filled the room with the reality of what was happening. Chioma's fingers clung weakly to her mother-in-law's like a lifeline, and for the first time that night, she felt something that wasn't abandonment. Presence. Lydia turned the phone slowly, capturing the blood on the sheets, the monitor's frantic warnings, the nurse's expressions, Kunle's posture near the door, Vanessa's red dress hovering in the corridor like a bad omen. Lydia didn't have to narrate. The image itself was a testimony. Vanessa froze when she realized she was being recorded. Her chin lifted instinctively, trying to look unbothered, but her eyes darted like a cornered animal. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for witnesses who didn't care about embarrassment. Rebecca, the senior midwife, stepped back into the room and pointed at Vanessa without hesitation. "You," she said, voice hard. "Out." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Kunle, expecting him to defend her, to rescue her from humiliation. Kunle hesitated, and in that hesitation Vanessa saw something she hadn't wanted to believe. When consequences appear, men like Kunle protect themselves first. "Leave,"
Dr.
Collins repeated, colder now.
Now.
Vanessa backed away slowly, anger and fear twisting her face. She retreated into the corridor, but the corridor camera still watched. Lydia's phone still watched. Nurses still watched. And Kunle finally felt it.
The shift.
It was subtle, like the air pressure changing before rain. The room was no longer his to manage. The narrative was no longer his to control. Too many eyes. Too many voices. Too much truth. Kunle's shoulders stiffened. His jaw worked. He swallowed once, a man realizing his usual tools, charm, calm, status, were suddenly useless against bleeding and evidence. Because when cruelty is hidden, power feels safe. But when cruelty is exposed, power panics. Kunle took a step forward, hands half raised as if he could calm the room with gestures. Everybody should relax, he tried, voice smoothing into that polished tone he used for clients. Let's not make this bigger then. Rebecca turned to him, so sharply he stopped mid-sentence. Relax, she repeated, disbelief like fire. Your wife is losing blood. Your child's heart rate is dropping. And you are talking about bigger? Lydia's camera stayed on his face. Mama Beatrice's prayers grew louder. The nurses moved with fierce efficiency. Dr. Collins gave orders, not suggestions. In the middle of it all, Chioma lay fighting for breath, but the room around her was fighting too. Fighting for her life in a way her husband had refused to. And for the first time that night, Chioma understood something that would change her forever.
God may not always stop the storm,
but he can arrange witnesses in the middle of it. Before we continue, let me ask you something because I want to hear your honest answer. If you were in that room and you saw a woman bleeding while her husband stepped out to take a call, would you speak up like Rebecca did, like Lydia did, like those nurses did? Or would you stay quiet because it's not your marriage? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe witnesses save lives, like this video right now, because stories like this need to reach every woman who thinks silence is the only way to survive. Subscribe and stay with me, because what happens next is where Kunle discovers something he never planned for. Once the truth has witnesses, it stops being a secret. It becomes a sentence. The night didn't explode into justice the way movies promise. It slowed instead, thickened, held its breath. Because karma doesn't rush. It waits for proof. Vanessa's phone slid across the hospital floor without ceremony.
No dramatic das. Nos chautit kemfeschen.
Just a careless movement, her heel catching the polished tile as she backed away from the room, irritation outweighing awareness. The phone left her hand, skidded once, spun lightly, and came to rest near Lydia's feet like it had chosen its witness. For half a second, no one noticed. The room was too full, of prayer, of orders, of blood and urgency and fear. Kunle was still talking, trying to regain ground, explaining nothing while sounding confident. Nurses moved. Machines beeped. Mama Beatrice's voice trembled with prayer. Then the screen lit up. A message preview glowed bright against the white floor.
Clean.
Unmistakable. Kunle's name at the top. Lydia looked down.
She didn't gasp.
She didn't rush. She bent slowly, deliberately, the way a woman does when she already knows what she's about to see will change everything. She picked the phone up with 2 fingers, as if touching poison, and her eyes scanned the screen. Her face changed, not into shock, but into certainty. What is it? Rebecca asked sharply, sensing the shift. Lydia didn't answer immediately. She lifted the phone instead and turned the screen outward, angling it first toward Mama Beatrice, then toward the room. The message was simple.
Casual. Deadly.
Tonight after she delivers, I'm leaving that hospital. Let them handle her. By morning, everything will change.
No metaphor. No ambiguity. No deniability.
Evidence doesn't argue. It reveals. Mama Beatrice's prayers stopped mid-sentence. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. She stared at the screen like she was reading a verdict written by a hand she had once defended. Let them handle her, she repeated softly. Her voice didn't shake this time. It lowered. The room felt heavier suddenly, like the truth had weight, and it had finally landed. Even the machines seemed louder now, every beep pressing the reality deeper into the air. Kunle turned. He saw the phone. He saw the message. And for the first time that night, his face lost its polish. "No," he said quickly, stepping forward. Give me that." He reached out, not toward Chioma, not toward his bleeding wife, but toward the phone, toward the evidence. Lydia stepped back. "Touch me," she said calmly, lifting her own phone higher, "and you'll add salt to your problems." Vanessa made a sound then, a sharp, disbelieving laugh that broke into panic halfway through. "He promised me," she blurted out, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "He said it was handled." He said. "Enough," Rebecca snapped, voice like steel. Vanessa froze. Her confidence drained fast now, glamour cracking under fluorescent lights. She took another step back, eyes darting between Kunle, Lydia, Mama Beatrice, and the nurses who were no longer pretending not to hear. Kunle opened his mouth again, scrambling for something, an explanation, a spin, control. "You're taking it out of context," he said, too fast. "It's just words. You know how messages." "Words?"
Mama Beatrice interrupted.
She stood up slowly, bones stiff but spine straight, the way women do when grief turns into resolve. She looked at Kunle, not with anger, not with tears, but with a disappointment so complete it stripped him of status. "You planned my daughter's absence," she said quietly. "You planned her disappearance while her blood was still inside her."
Kunle shook his head.
"Mama, please. You don't understand." "I understand," she said, cutting him off. "You thought God sleeps at night." That sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. The corridor camera kept recording. Lydia's phone kept recording. Rebecca gestured sharply to security staff who had begun gathering at the door, drawn by raised voices and chaos that no longer felt private. The lies started collapsing under their own weight. Vanessa tried to retreat fully now, but panic makes people careless. Her heel slipped again as she turned, and she collided with a metal trolley with a clang loud enough to echo. Nurses flinched. Heads turned. The moment drew more attention, exactly what she hadn't planned. Kunle stood frozen, hands half raised, caught between roles.
Loa.
Husband. Public man. Criminal. He had always believed he could manage narratives. He curated stories the way he curated deals, control the angle, remove risk, bury costs. But evidence doesn't care about narratives. Evidence is patient. Lydia zoomed in on the screen, capturing Kunle's name, the timestamp, the message in full. She said nothing while she did it. She didn't need to. Dr. Collins stepped closer to Kunle now, eyes hard. "You will sign the consent," he said flatly. "And you will step back. Your presence is not helping." Kunle swallowed.
He signed.
His hand shook. The authority he'd worn so comfortably all his life slipped further with every second the truth remained visible. Nurses avoided his eyes now, not out of fear, but judgment. Vanessa hugged herself, suddenly aware that she wasn't the chosen one. She was just the rehearsal. Inside the room, Chioma drifted in and out, pain and medication blurring the edges of reality. But somewhere beneath the fog, she felt it, the change. The way the room no longer centered around her husband. The way voices protected her now. The way silence had been replaced with witnesses. She didn't know about the message yet. She didn't need to. Her body knew something had shifted. Outside, Kunle tried one last time. "Let's be reasonable," he said, voice dropping into that familiar, smooth register. "We can handle this privately. No need for..." "For what?" Lydia asked calmly. "For truth." The security officer stepped forward then, gesturing toward Kunle and Vanessa. "Sir, madam, we need you to step aside." Kunle stared at him, stunned. "Do you know who I am?" The officer met his eyes. "Tonight? Yes." And it wasn't the answer Kunle wanted. The night pressed in closer, heavier now, like the truth had weight, and it was determined to stay. Lies suffocate when exposed to air. They need darkness to survive. And in that hospital corridor, Under lights that never blinked, betrayal stopped being rumor. It became record. Before we continue, pause with me for a second. If you saw that message, if proof slid into your hands without warning, would you protect the truth? Or protect the person who hurt you? Tell me in the comments. Like this video if you believe evidence is louder than excuses. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when truth doesn't back down. Because what comes next is the moment Kunle learns something he never planned for. Once betrayal is recorded, it doesn't just end a marriage. It rewrites a future. By the time the sky began to pale at the edges, karma no longer felt abstract. It had names. It had badges. It had forms clipped to boards and voices trained to sound calm while dismantling lives. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and sleeplessness. Night had stretched itself thin, exhausted by truth. Kunle sat in a plastic chair near the nurse's station, shoulders slumped now, suit wrinkled, phone face down in his hand like it had finally betrayed him. The confidence he'd worn all evening had drained away quietly, the way blood drains when no one is watching. Two officers stood a few feet away, not aggressive, not rushed. Professional. Patient. One asked questions while the other took notes. Names.
Times.
Relationships. The words abandonment and medical emergency appeared more than once, spoken without drama, written without mercy. Rebecca handed over the corridor footage when they asked for it.
No hesitation. No apology.
Lydia transferred her recordings to a secure drive, narrating calmly, dates and sequences precise. Evidence stacked itself neatly, one piece leaning on the next, until denial had nowhere left to stand. Inside the ward, Chioma lay in ICU, sedated, alive by margins so small they felt unreal. Mama Beatrice sat beside her, refusing to leave, counting breaths like blessings. Each rise of Chioma's chest was an argument against the plan Kunle had written with his thumbs and sent like a promise. At 4:12 a.m., Kunle's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen with a reflex of habit, hope flickering stupidly for half a second. Vanessa's name didn't appear. It never would again. Instead, it was Emmanuel from his office, calling too early, voice tight and stripped of small talk. "There's a problem," Emmanuel said. "We've had visitors." Kunle straightened slightly. "Visitors?" "YFCC," Emmanuel replied. "They came with documents. They asked for shipment logs, messages, account trails.
They're freezing 3 accounts for now.
More may follow." Kunle closed his eyes. The call ended without ceremony. There was nothing left to negotiate. Power doesn't collapse in explosions. It dissolves. Friends stop answering. Access expires. Doors that once opened with a smile require appointments that never get approved. Another message came in, this one from a partner who had toasted Kunle's ambition less than a week earlier. It was short, careful,
Distancing.
"Until this clears, we're stepping back." Then another, and another. By 5 a.m., Kunle's phone was quiet in the most dangerous way.
No arguments. No reassurance.
Just absence. Across the corridor, Vanessa stood near the elevator bank, arms wrapped around herself, makeup smudged, dress suddenly loud in the unforgiving light. She typed furiously, calling people who didn't pick up. She tried her sister, her friend, someone who once promised introductions and weekends and protection. Nothing. She caught Kunle's eye once, desperation flickering, and for a moment she looked like she might come toward him, demand explanations, anchor herself to whatever was left. Then she stopped. Whatever she saw on his face told her the truth she'd avoided all along. Men who plan your entrance are rehearsing your exit. Vanessa turned and walked away without a word. The elevator doors closed on her reflection, fractured and smaller than she'd imagined herself to be. At 5:38 a.m., a nurse stepped into the corridor with a smile that trembled. "The baby is stable," she said. "The mother is still critical, but she's holding." Mama Beatrice pressed her hands together and wept, quietly, deeply, like a woman who had bargained with heaven and been heard. Lydia leaned against the wall, exhaled, then straightened. There would be time to feel later. Truth still needed its witnesses. The officers approached Kunle again. "Sir," one said, "we'll need you to come with us to complete statements." Kunle nodded. He stood without resistance. The gesture surprised him. As they walked, past the room where his wife fought for life, past the door he had chosen to step through, Kunle slowed. He turned his head once, just once, toward the ICU glass. Chioma didn't move. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The officers waited. Professional. Unmoved. Kunle faced forward again and kept walking. By sunrise, Lagos stretched awake, traffic humming, vendors calling, life continuing with its brutal indifference. But Kunle's world had narrowed to paperwork and waiting rooms and the sound of stamps landing on forms. Accounts flagged, devices logged, statements taken.
No shouting. No chows.
Just exposure. Later that morning, a message circulated quietly through the networks Kunle once controlled. Business groups, church chats, family threads. Screenshots blurred but recognizable. Whispers replaced applause. Distance replaced loyalty. By the time Chioma opened her eyes briefly, dawn light spilling soft and pale across the ICU curtains, the man who had left her bleeding had already lost the only things he ever truly protected. Not his marriage, not his family, his image. Mama Beatrice leaned close, voice steady. "You're here," she said. "You're safe." Chioma closed her eyes again, a tear slipping free. She didn't ask about Kunle. She didn't need to. Karma had already arrived. It didn't need years. It needed timing. And timing came before morning. Before we go on, tell me, do you believe karma must be allowed to be real? Or is this the kind that scares you more? If you've ever seen power dissolve the moment witnesses refuse silence, like this video. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when survival turns into strength. Because the night may be over. But Chioma's story isn't. Chioma woke the way people do after nearly leaving the world. Not all at once, not cleanly, but in fragments. Light first, pale and careful, slipping through the ICU blinds like it was asking permission. Then sound. A steady machine. A breath that wasn't hers. A weight on her hand. She tried to move and pain answered immediately, sharp and unmistakable, reminding her of the thin line she had crossed and somehow returned from.
Her throat felt dry.
Her body felt foreign. But she was here. That fact settled slowly, heavily, like truth. "Chioma," Mama Beatrice whispered, leaning close the moment her eyelids fluttered. Her voice cracked on the name. "My daughter." Chioma turned her head slightly. It took effort. Everything took effort. She saw her mother-in-law's face, older than it had been yesterday, eyes red, but steady now in a way Chioma had never seen before. There was something else, too.
Guilt.
And resolve. Then Chioma felt it again. The weight on her hand. So small it barely registered as real. Her fingers twitched instinctively, and something curled back around them.
Warm.
Fragile.
Alive.
Her daughter. The nurse noticed the movement and smiled softly. "She's strong," she said, as if strength were contagious. Just like her mother. Chioma stared at the tiny fingers wrapped around hers. They were impossibly delicate, nails like pale petals, grip weak but determined. In that moment, the world narrowed to something simple and unarguable. I lived.
She lived.
Everything else. Fear, betrayal, humiliation fell back into their proper places.
Secondary.
Loud but no longer central. Mama Beatrice began to cry then, quietly, the way women cry when the worst is past and the truth finally arrives. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't see it soon enough. I protected my son when I should have protected you." Chioma didn't answer immediately. She watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, watched the miracle of breath repeat itself. She thought about the years she had confused endurance for love, how she had learned to survive quietly and called it peace, how she had believed that if she just held on long enough, the suffering would transform into reward. Endurance is not love. Survival is not forgiveness. She squeezed Mama Beatrice's hand gently. Not in absolution, but understanding. We're here now, Chioma said softly. Her voice was weak, but the certainty behind it was not. As the morning light grew stronger, staff came and went. Vitals were checked. Medications adjusted. Lydia slipped in quietly, eyes tired but bright, standing near the door like a guard who had kept watch all night. When Chioma saw her, tears finally came, not the frantic kind, but the slow release of someone who no longer had to pretend. You scared me, Lydia said, attempting lightness and failing. Her voice broke anyway. Chioma managed a small smile. You came. Always, Lydia said simply. There was a moment, brief, honest, when Chioma thought of Kunle. Not with longing, not with anger, just awareness. A door she no longer needed to open. Where is he? Chioma asked, not because she wanted him near, but because the question felt like closing a chapter properly.
Mama Beatrice inhaled slowly.
Not here, she said. And he won't be. That was enough. Chioma didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel revenge. What she felt was space. A quiet clearing where obligation used to sit. The realization settled gently but firmly. Some marriages don't deserve repair. Some men don't deserve another chance. And some women are reborn the moment they stop protecting what nearly killed them. Chioma looked down at her daughter again. The tiny hand still held hers, unaware of the wreckage that had preceded her arrival. This child would never learn love as silence, would never confuse fear for loyalty, would never be taught that survival was the price of belonging. I'm choosing life, Chioma whispered, not to the room, not to the past, but to herself. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she had always known but never spoken aloud. Choosing life didn't mean bitterness. It didn't require hatred. It meant clarity. It meant freedom. It meant understanding that loyalty without safety is not virtue, it is erosion. As the morning advanced, the hospital shifted into its daytime rhythm. Phones buzzed. Voices changed. Somewhere else, paperwork was being signed. Statements finalized. Consequences processed. Chioma didn't ask for details. She didn't need to witness the fall to validate her decision. Her body would heal slowly. Trust even slower. But she was no longer confused about what love required. Love stayed. Love showed up. Love did not step into corridors while you bled. She closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her under, but this time it wasn't fear waiting on the other side. It was rest. And in that quiet ICU room, with Dawn fully awake and her daughter breathing steadily beside her, Chioma and Kiru let go, not in anger, but in clarity. She didn't need revenge. She had chosen freedom, and that choice was the beginning of everything. Chioma's story pauses here, not because the truth is finished, but because what comes next is heavier than what you've already witnessed. She survived. Her daughter lived. But survival is only the first chapter of justice. Because when a woman chooses life over loyalty, the world around her doesn't stay quiet.
Questions follow.
Consequences unfold. Courtrooms replace corridors. Testimonies replace whispers. And people who are comfortable in the dark start scrambling when the light refuses to dim. In part 2, you'll see what happens after the hospital doors close. You'll see whether Kunle's power can still speak for him when evidence speaks louder. You'll see if Vanessa really disappears or returns with a story of her own. You'll see how Mama Beatrice reckons with the son she raised and the woman she almost lost. And you'll see Chioma, not as a patient, not as a wife, but as a woman rebuilding her life with a child who will never learn love as suffering.
So here's what I need from you right now.
Do you think Kunle will face real consequences, or will money and connections soften the fall? If you were Chioma, would you allow him near your child after what he did? Should forgiveness ever come before accountability? Be honest in the comments. I'm reading them all. And one more question. This one matters most. If you've ever witnessed someone being mistreated and stayed silent, what would you do differently now? If this story moved you, like the video so it reaches the woman who thinks endurance is love. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, because it's coming soon and it doesn't look away. Part 2 will answer the question this knight raised but didn't finish. When the truth is exposed, does justice really follow? Stay with